And it was actually her father who presented me with the challenge or the idea of becoming an IT guy at an automotive dealership that he was the CFO of. I remember this conversation plain as day. It was, I looked him in the eye, I said, I don't know the first thing about computers. And he said, fake it. And I said, all right.
Welcome again to another episode of Reframe for Resilience. Our guest today is Mr. Mousa Hamad. He is Vice President of Operations for Howard Financials. And I think this is a new position he's actually taking on, coming from a similar position in another company. Welcome, Mr. Hamad.
Dr. Douglas, thank you so much for having me on today.
Our pleasure. As you know, we focus on reframing. We're taking different perspectives and able you to deal with the problems, and we try to understand how that has helped with resilience, helped with your ability to face other problems. So let us start off by talking about part of your journey. Could you share with us perhaps a challenge that really changed your life, caused you to change perspective and really change your life?
Yeah, I think I would go back to my time in college and recognizing and realizing that that wasn't really a good fit for me. It was very difficult for me to learn in the traditional way that a university would have wanted me to. And so I dropped out. I mean, I joke they asked me not to come back after I had a couple semesters of bad grades. But I dropped out of school and wasn't really sure what to do with my life or what I wanted to do when I grew up. And just started taking on various jobs. I'd waited tables before, so I waited tables. I actually worked retail at Champs in the mall for a while, did a couple of different things. But ultimately knew that there had to be a little bit more out there for me and other challenges. And so with that, I had ended up meeting a young woman and we were dating. And it was actually her father who presented me with the challenge or the idea of becoming an IT guy at an automotive dealership that he was the CFO of. I remember this conversation plain as day. It was, I looked him in the eye, I said, I don't know the first thing about computers. And he said, fake it. And I said, all right, let's go. And so, that idea being that reframing the concept that not having a degree wasn't a limitation and that there was somebody that believed in my ability to just figure it out. And I think it was at that moment that I recognized that there really isn't a problem or a challenge that if you face it head on, you're not going to be successful in one way or another.
Well, thanks for sharing that. And the idea is to face it head on, not to fake it head on.
You're right. Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm glad you faced it head on. So share with us a little bit. This, of course, must have been really quite a challenge for you to step into that, not having had the traditional training in IT. I'm assuming that you were sort of an IT guru. You played around a lot with computers, and that is why he had the confidence that you could do this. So tell me, what did you learn about yourself when you stepped into a company in an IT type position?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that I would touch on there. The first is that I really am adept at just figuring things out. Google is your best friend. I've been using it for 20 years to make my way through the tech and professional world. And if you look hard enough and you search in the right way, you can usually find the answer or something that will get you moving in a directionally accurate way towards a solution. The second thing that I kind of learned about myself and just learned about life in general is that really so much of what we do professionally comes down to the idea of our willingness to serve others and serve people. And I think recognizing, having done those jobs like waiting tables and working retail, you kind of learn to humble yourself a little bit and recognize that you're really just there to support the customer, whether that's to fix their computer or to get them a pair of shoes or bring them their side of fries that you forgot, right? And so I think that's definitely a big one is just tapping into our servant mindset and helping those around us. Um, and then, when it comes down to kind of what you talked about, the ability to figure tech out. Yeah, I would Google stuff to fix his home computer. And that's how he kind of got it in his mind that I knew about tech because I could help him with his home computer. But I will say, I look back and growing up, I recognized that my family kind of looked at me when something was broken. The joke was if it has a plug and it's broken, Musa can probably fix it. Was just kind of the approach. Usually it was around TVs, video games, technology, things like that. And I didn't realize until I got into tech how much I actually loved it, which was kind of a cool realization to come to.
Yeah, so that was a realization that you had of yourself in terms of these natural abilities that you had that you didn't quite recognize. Now, since then, as you have now been in in corporate, I'm going to say, not waiting on tables, but now in a corporate type function, you're a vice president. What would you say that you have learned about yourself that now that you reflect on your younger days, you wish you had known about yourself?
Oh, um, I wish I had tapped more into my inquisitive nature when I was younger. I was so much more certain about things in my younger days, and as I've progressed in my career and just grown older and wisdom and having a daughter, I've kind of recognized, what is it, Walt Whitman that said, "Be more curious than certain." I think I wish I had tapped into that curiosity about things more when I was younger, but I'm grateful that I discovered it as I've progressed through all my journey.
Yes, in fact, I was going to ask you the question that way. What is it you're most grateful about? And I guess the answer would be that you have learned to be more curious than certain.
Yeah, I would say that. And also, another thing that I've worked really hard to tap into also is, and I'm going to answer your last question and kind of this one at the same time, is the ability to be empathetic towards people. And I think that's what's made me a better people leader as I've progressed in my career. And I didn't have that early on in my career. And I think a lot of us when we're younger are a little more self-centered. And so I'm grateful that I was able to tap into empathy for those around me because it's made me a much better leader of people, and just better as a human in general.
I like that, the servant leader, and many of our leaders miss that,
Yeah.
the service part
Yes.
of leadership. I do like that. When we met in our pre-interview, you mentioned sometimes or at least in your early days, uh, having PTSD. Do you mind sharing with us what that was about?
Not at all. So, yeah, I'm diagnosed with complex PTSD. It stems from I'm a first generation Palestinian American, so both my parents are from the West Bank. I was born in Fairfax, Virginia, but I spent some time on the West Bank during the late 80s. And as you can imagine, unfortunately, seeing some of the horrors that are unfolding now, over in the Middle East. It wasn't really the greatest place to be for a young child. And I didn't realize how much of that I carried with me into adulthood and the way it would show up in terms of my stress responses and things of that nature. Until I got to doing some really deep work through, let's be honest, I think we all benefit from a little bit of therapy. So I did a lot of deep work at therapy, really tapped into the idea of meditation, spirituality, um, and ultimately kind of unearthed these repressed memories that allowed me to then navigate challenges in today's world a lot better than I was previously, which I also think is a contributing factor to my ascension in leadership, that ability to have the emotional intelligence and know and understand how we react and why we react a certain way to things. I spoke a few minutes ago about the empathy bit, and I think it was going on that journey that helped me tap into the empathy for other people. And there's a lot of different folks that have spoken on this concept, so I'm not coming up with anything original here, but the idea that our trauma or the things that we think hurt us are actually our superpower, where if we can learn to control that hypervigilance, if we grew up in a rough childhood or something like that, that allows us to be keenly observant of people. So I'll give you a great example. That skill serves me really well in contract negotiation. Being able to have a conversation and really be in tune and observe somebody's tone and their body language and the way things change has allowed me to help negotiate better deals. Or on the flip side of that, it also helps me better lead people when I can see that somebody is stressed about something that they're not letting on. And instead of coming down on them and berating them, looking them in the eye and asking them a question of, hey, what's going on? And so that journey of discovering the diagnosis of PTSD and how it would show up in my adulthood was a huge contributing factor to my ability to rise in the ranks of corporate America.
Given that experience and that journey of self-discovery, that clearly has really impacted your life generally. What's the one principle, if you like, you would say you have learned with respect to being resilient? How does that contribute to being resilient?
Well, I think there's this concept that I've read about in the past. Is an author named Talib. Is the same guy who wrote Black Swan.
Yes.
The concept is anti-fragility.
Mm.
And I think for me, the idea we talk so much about resilience in the world today, businesses being resilient, people being resilient, and resilience is simply absorbing a blow and bouncing back to your original state. Anti-fragility is the idea of absorbing that blow and coming back stronger and better because of that pain that you endured. And so I think the biggest thing that I've learned is that the pain of our past, the challenges that we've had, all of those things have led you to this moment, and they've all built character and they've built a toughness within you that you probably don't even recognize in yourself. I remember hearing one time, I'm horrible at remembering names, but somebody on a podcast or a YouTube video or something was saying, they said, tell your story, like sit down and tell your story to yourself, and but tell it as if it's somebody else, and see how you'll marvel at the things that you've been through and the challenges that you've faced and where you've come.
Mr. Hamad, thank you very much for sharing your journey with us. Thank you for reminding us that we should be servant leaders. And thank you for mentioning the Black Swan. It's a book that I love. And I
Yeah.
so much love the imagery that we think of swans as only being white, but they are black swans.
Yep.
And we ought to be prepared that black swan events might happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we
100%.
probably are right now in a black swan event.
Yeah.
It's quite apropos of
Yeah,
reframing for resilience in these times. Thank you very
100%.
much, Mr. Ahmad.
Thank you so much, Dr. Douglas. I appreciate it.